Good evening and welcome to NTDUK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. The Supreme Court rules the ISIS bride can't return to the UK to fight for her citizenship. The EU plans to introduce vaccine passports by summer, and a British man is jailed in Singapore for breaking quarantine rules to meet his fiancée. The UK's highest court rules that a schoolgirl who left London to join an Islamic terror group in Syria is not allowed to return to the UK to fight for her citizenship. She left the UK at the age of 15. NTD's Jane Worrell reports from London.
All 5 justices unanimously ruled that Shamima Begum should not be allowed back into the UK. She wants to come back to fight for her British citizenship. Now 21, Shamima Begum secretly left her home in Bethnal Green, East London, at the age of 15 with some of her school friends. She travelled to Syria and married an ISIS fighter. In 2019, she was found heavily pregnant in a Syrian refugee camp, mourning the death of her 2 children. In interviews with the media, she appeared to endorse terror attacks on British soil and showed little remorse for joining ISIS. Then Home Secretary Sajid Javid stripped her of her British citizenship on security grounds. It sparked a series of legal battles in the UK. The Supreme Court on Friday dismissed Begum's appeal. The President of the Supreme Court said, "The right to a fair hearing does not trump all other considerations, such as the safety of the public." Sajid Javid welcomed the ruling. It's a view shared by security pundits like Will Geddes.
And in the instances of Shamima Begum, although people will say that she was a child, she was cognitive, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she had vocalised that she had no compassion for the safety of British people.
But civil liberty groups says this ruling sets a dangerous precedent and she has a right to a fair trial. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
A petition urging the government not to roll out vaccination passports has gained more than 200,000 signatures. A petition on the Parliament website says the government must be completely clear to the public about the use of vaccine passports and their intentions. The Prime Minister on Tuesday said the government was reviewing the idea, but emphasised that any such scheme shouldn't be discriminatory against people who can't have the vaccine. A parliamentary petition that receives more than 100,000 signatures must be considered for a debate in Parliament. The European Union, however, wants to introduce vaccination passports by summer, but many issues still need to be resolved. NTD's Elle Rhodes has the story.
EU leaders agreed Thursday to introduce a vaccine passport by summer.
One point which was important at the end was the digital vaccination certificate. Here, everyone agrees that we need one.
Such a health pass would allow those vaccinated to travel freely, and it also might help reopening other areas of the economy across Europe. Merkel said it will take at least 3 months for the EU to develop such a system. This means the scheme won't be ready by the time UK residents are expected to enjoy overseas travel again on the 17th of May. Tourist-dependent southern European countries like Greece and Spain have been pushing for this. Airlines like British Airways are also counting on them for their recovery. But some fear the free movement of people in the EU, one of its core principles, should not depend on such a certificate. Earlier this month, the founder of a biometrics company said such passes only need to contain 2 pieces of information.
One is, has this person been vaccinated? And the other is, what does this person look like? You really don't need to know anything else at all. You don't need to know things like names and addresses and ages and health insurance numbers or anything like that.
This could ease privacy concerns. He said they pose other serious questions for society.
I mean, there are issues of discrimination, there are issues of two classes, there are issues of privilege, there are ageist issues, because it's likely older people, such as myself, will get the vaccines before younger people, which means that older people will have access to services and capabilities that young people are excluded from.
iProve is developing a vaccine passport, which is being tested by the NHS. Elle Rhodes, NTD News.
A British man is jailed for 2 weeks in Singapore. It's after he broke strict quarantine rules to meet up with his fiancée. Here's NTD's Marianne Lytham.
52-year-old Nigel Ski left his hotel room in Singapore 3 times on September 21st last year. One of those times was to meet up with his then-fiancée Agatha Makesh Ayamale, who booked a room in the same hotel. Ski wasn't wearing a mask while breaking quarantine, which is a requirement in Singapore.
Mixed feelings, but at least their sentence was halved by what the prosecution sought.
Ski was also fined £540, while 39-year-old Iyamale was sentenced to 1 week imprisonment for abetting him. Ski married Iyamale in November.
No, they're not appealing. They want to finish off this matter, and he wants to go back home as soon as possible.
Singapore has jailed and fined others for breaking COVID-19 rules, while some foreigners' work permits have been revoked. Marianne Lytham, NTD News.
The government confirms pubs will be allowed to serve takeaway drinks when beer gardens reopen on the 12th of April. It's said to be a lifeline for the estimated 60% of pubs that are struggling as they don't have outdoor space. Since the third lockdown, pubs, restaurants and bars were stopped from selling alcohol to takeaway. Venues could reopen fully from May the 17th, with all legal limits on social contact lifted after June the 21st. Police in England and Wales are ramping up the number of fines they're giving out to people breaking lockdown rules. They've issued nearly 70,000 fines so far, over a third of them in recent weeks. NTD's Eddie Aitken has more information.
Since lockdowns began, police have issued about 70,000 fines. Of those, over 26,000 were issued in the first month leading up to February the 14th, about 40%. The fixed penalty notices differ in each UK country. In Wales, the fine for over 18-year-olds is £60 for the first offence, then £120 thereafter. In Northern Ireland, it's £60 for the first time, £120 for the second offence, then it doubles up to a maximum of £960. Scotland has the same fines, but they apply to 16-year-olds and over. For England, people over 18 can be fined £200 for the first offence, £400 for the second offence, then doubling each time up to a maximum of £6,400. The total number of fines issued in England is now around 63,000 and over 5,700 in Wales. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Britain's second largest supermarket group, Sainsbury's, will award staff a third bonus for their efforts during the pandemic. The one-off payment will be made in May is to be based on 3% of an employee's annual pay, so a full-time staffer would receive more than £530. Sainsbury's also announced a pay increase for store staff. The hourly rate for Sainsbury's and Argos store workers would increase to £9.50. Sainsbury's has over 170,000 workers, making it one of Britain's biggest private sector employers. Local residents are frustrated at the closure of West London's Hammersmith Bridge. It's affecting many who rely upon it being open. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the story.
This vital link across the Thames has been completely closed since last autumn. Not even cyclists and pedestrians are allowed to cross due to serious cracks in the pedestals that support the bridge. The Grade 2 listed structure was opened on the 18th of June 1887, but now has barriers up and workmen at its entrance. I spoke with Michelle Coulter, a local resident and part of a local campaign group. She told me that before its closure, 16,000 people were using the bridge daily.
The impact on the local community has been massive. There are thousands of school children who used to get to school across the bridge who now have to take very lengthy detours on unlit, muddy towpaths. Elderly who have essential services they need to reach in Hammersmith, such as their doctors, hospitals, shops, who are now stranded.
Key workers who need to get to work at Charing Cross Hospital are now facing a 90-minute journey each way. The local authority, Hammersmith and Fulham, own the bridge. The estimated cost of the repair is £160 million. She says residents were promised a ferry to cross the river, but now there's a delay. It seems it may not happen until at least the summer and then may be limited.
And it seems that the capacity is only going to be 800 people an hour. When you take into account the fact that 16,000 people were crossing the bridge every day, I really don't think that's going to be sufficient.
She says residents are told it could be 6 to 7 years before the bridge is fully repaired and open. She says despite the Transport Secretary getting involved last year, little seems to have been done.
But here we are almost 6 months later and the task force aren't even discussing the funding issues.
With no final resolution decided, there is growing frustration for the local residents and for those wanting to cross this historic bridge. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, London.
Coming up, Airbus is working on a hybrid electric aeroplane engine to reduce emissions. Find out more when we return. The Prime Minister will lead a new Union Cabinet committee as the government tries to combat Scottish independence. According to the Times newspaper, Downing Street says Boris Johnson will chair regular meetings of the Union Strategy Committee. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack told the BBC the new committee is a step up from its predecessor, the Union Unit. The committee will comprise of the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Cabinet Office Minister and the Secretaries of State for Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. Last month, Johnson visited Scotland to try to stem growing support for another independence referendum. Now to the US, President Joe Biden walked back 7 executive orders earlier this week issued by then President Donald Trump. NTD's Christina Kim tells us more.
One memorandum reviewed federal funding for cities, quote, permitting anarchy, violence, and destruction. Following the riots after George Floyd's death, the memo said cities like Seattle, Portland, and New York could potentially have their funds slashed. Biden reversed this. Biden also cut a 2018 executive order called Reducing Poverty in America by promoting opportunity and economic mobility. Trump's order directed the government to reduce wasteful spending by getting rid of duplicate or ineffective programs, target benefits for people with low income, and improve economic independence. Another canceled executive order is one that directed federal agencies to modify regulations that would hurt economic recovery from the pandemic, and an order calling for a return to classical architecture for federal buildings was undone. In the list of 7, Biden wiped out one of Trump's last executive orders, which stopped unelected bureaucrats from moving federal rules forward. The White House gave no explanation for this move in their official press report. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Over to New York City, where jobs in the arts and entertainment industry fell by almost 70% last year from the year before. NTD's Ariane Pasta has more from one of the city's most iconic museums.
In normal years, tourists would come to New York for the Broadway shows and games and concerts at Madison Square Garden, among other iconic events. All these were closed for months, but New York City's Metropolitan Museum has been open to visitors for quite some time. On top of the city's gradual reopening, the state has started a program called New York Pops Up. 100 pop-up performances are scheduled to be held throughout the state within 100 days. But they won't be announced beforehand in order to avoid big crowds. New Yorkers can't wait for the city to be fully reopened so they can enjoy the art again. Luckily, some sites like the Metropolitan are open to the public already. Ariane Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Airbus is working on a hybrid electric propulsion engine. The European plane maker says it's one option to reduce emissions. NTD's Al Rhodes tells us more.
Airbus said on Friday it's working on hybrid electric propulsion technology. They say a combination of electric with other types of engine power is one way to start reducing CO2 emissions. Previously, Airbus has mainly publicised hydrogen as an energy source for future planes. It's pledged its first hydrogen-powered commercial aircraft for 2035. But now they say they are exploring a variety of hybrid electric and hydrogen technologies. Experts say that hydrogen technology has challenges for larger planes. Planned replacement of its 150-seat A320 would likely enter service in the 2030s. That would be a hybrid of hydrogen power and electric. Engine makers are now actively exploring open rotor engines with visible blades to combine traditional engines with electric. An Airbus spokesman said only a combination of technologies, including hydrogen, will help us aim for zero emission. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Parliament's Transport Committee is calling for evidence to assist with an inquiry into the safety of smart motorways. NTD's Neil Woodrow has a report.
The committee wants to assess whether smart motorways are safe and look at their impact upon congestion. Smart motorways overseen by Highways England often use CCTV, radar and sensors to keep an eye on traffic, and there are different types. Some use the hard shoulder for emergency use only, some open it up during busy times of traffic, and some have no hard shoulder at all. Motorists move to the hard shoulder if their car breaks down, and many feel safer on a motorway that has one permanently available. A study by motoring organisation the AA found that only 1 in 10 drivers say they feel safer on all-lane running motorways compared to traditional motorways. AA President Edmund King says fatalities are taking place where vehicles have been left in vulnerable positions in live lanes and that an urgent and independent review is needed. In a March 2020 report, the Department for Transport concluded that smart motorways are as safe as or safer than conventional motorways, although the risk of breaking down in a live lane is significantly increased. The deadline for submissions for the latest inquiry is April the 9th. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
A Savile Row tailor in London is embracing a new way to meet with customers virtually. Now, a telepresence robot is performing remote fittings for overseas clients.
Huntsman head cutter Dario Canera is conducting a suit fitting in his tailor shop on London's Savile Row. But the man being measured is thousands of miles away in Seoul, South Korea. As the pandemic limits international travel, the 171-year-old tailor is using a telepresence robot to perform remote fittings.
The biggest hurdle we've had to face is the fact that we just can't see our customers. Traditionally, we would be away 4, 5, maybe more times per year on what we call trunk shows, where we visit cities all over the world to see our customers. That's not been able to happen this year.
The robot's name is Mr. Hammock, after a famed 1970s Huntsman cutter. California-based Omni Labs created the machine. Its screen and high-resolution camera lets Canera communicate with clients and a trained assistant. Canera used a touchpad on his laptop to guide the robot around the Seoul tailor shop.
The quality of image was very important, of course. Being able to move around freely, we can move the robot anywhere in the room. We can move it up, down, we can zoom in, zoom out.
London's Savile Row in the affluent Mayfair district is known for traditional English bespoke tailoring. Huntsman moved to the street in 1919 and was the inspiration for the Kingsman action film series. The pandemic has presented unprecedented challenges and financial pressures.
The biggest impact for us has been the shut doors. I think had the closed doors and people been able to travel, we would have seen -20s, -30s. But for us, when the lockdown initially happened, I think it was quite a big shock in March for us to see how that reflected.
Paul says they began looking for a high-tech alternative in March. For now, the telesporting bespoke service is only available in Seoul. But Paul says Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, and Singapore should come online soon. A tailor in the UK is taking an innovative approach to measurements. Huntsman in London is using a robot to take measurements remotely.
Up next, the National Trust plans to bring more nature to those in towns and cities. Find out more after the break. Blossom is a symbol of hope and a sign that spring is on its way. The National Trust hopes cherry blossom tree circles will be a joyful sight for Britons during the pandemic. NTD's Marion Leatham has more.
The National Trust is planning to plant blossoming tree circles in cities across the UK over the next 5 years. London, Newcastle, Nottingham and Plymouth are the first cities to be chosen for the initiative. London's Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park will see the first blossom tree circle this spring. To represent the city's 33 boroughs, 3 circles will be planted with 33 cherry, plum, hawthorn and crabapple trees. The National Trust hopes that the tree circles will start an annual spring blossom tradition in the UK, bringing people together to appreciate nature. The aim is to emulate the Hanami cherry blossom season in Japan. Hanami is a traditional Japanese custom of enjoying the transient beauty of flowers, attracting hundreds of thousands of overseas visitors every spring. The National Trust said they want to create beautiful spaces to give people hope as Britain emerged from the pandemic. Marianne Leatham, NTD News.
A new report warns of the increase in houses built on floodplains. NTD's Eddie Aitken has more.
A new parliamentary report released Friday into Managing Floods warns of the risk from new developments on floodplains. Government policy says not to build there unless unavoidable. But the Environment Agency expects there could be a 50% increase in houses built on floodplains over the next 50 years. The report by the Public Accounts Committee recommends reforms to the planning system to mitigate the risk. It adds local authorities are often hampered by lack of resources to enforce flood protections. Committee member Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown MP told The Telegraph, where houses are desperately needed, developers should build them on raised platforms. The 2019 to 2020 winter floods in England and Wales caused damage in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
We've all heard of tractors, but have you ever heard of fruit-shaken tractors? They are common in a Spanish city. Now it's orange picking season, the tractors are out and in action. NTD's John Conway brings us more.
During January and February, tractors can be seen on the streets of orange-producing Valencia, shaking trees and catching the bitter oranges in giant plastic nets.
People often ask us, what are you going to do with the oranges? If they were good, they would not be on the tree. Or they ask, can we take them? Are they fit for consumption?
While the annual orange picking campaign takes place, some residents continue to be amused about it. A recent clip of a tractor shaking the trees is gaining thousands of retweets and likes on social media.
People are talking on WhatsApp, and suddenly they bump into the tractor, and you have to stop them and tell them to be careful with the tractor.
There are 12,000 orange trees across the city, and between 350 and 400 tonnes of oranges are taken each year. But bitter oranges hanging from trees are not fit for human consumption, and the picked up fruits are destined to make compost. Joanna Conway, NTD News.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Leith.